Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, 2024. Hey, if you like JRPGs, you were well taken care of this year. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Metaphor ReFantazio, you had the East series popping off, you had the Trail series popping off, and that's just skimming the surface. So if you like JRPGs, 2024 wasn't that bad. And fortunately, I do love JRPGs. But when it came to every other genre, every other developer that usually lifts up my life, you know, a BioWare, a Bethesda, maybe a Rocksteady, the occasional, very occasional Ubisoft game, all of them let me down in colossal ways this year. It really was a heartbreaking year for me when it came to big AAA games. So I want to rank my top 10 worst / most disappointing games for 2024. And I want to make sure before we lead into this any further, this is my personal ranking. I am not looking at like Open Critic, what is objectively the worst and best games of the year. And no doubt, because it is my list, my personal taste will shine through with what my personal worst game of the year was, as I'm sure you'll no doubt already have guessed. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with an honorable mention. I gotta talk about Death Note Killer Within. It's been a weird year for anime games, and look, I didn't plan out my outfit for this video, but yeah, I adore Death Note. Death Note is one of my favorite pieces of media ever, like hands down, bar none, one of the best stories ever told. I adore it. The soundtrack is incredible. I own like so much Death Note merch now. It's absurd. So I was really excited when it was starting to leak that a Death Note game was on the way. And I remember guessing with a friend, like, it's got to be a sort of, you know, Among Us style game. And it was exactly that. But man, there is a world where we got like a Death Note visual novel spin-off story that played like Danganronpa or Zero Escape and was just a straight up investigation, that same kind of mental chess match that you have in Death Note. Don't get me wrong, Killer Within isn't bad, but just for me, I played for a few hours and I went, I wish this was something else. So it's the honorable mention of the video. But now we get into number 10. Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection. Aspire. What the hell, man? This was, I know it's fixed now, but this was such a slam dunk at launch. Like, this was the easiest money I think I've seen all year. Oh, Battlefront, a renowned series. Oh, it's the classic game, so no tendrils of EA and the microtransactions have gotten their way into this game, and I know EA has since backed off of that with the newer Battlefront games. That's how they started. These were untainted, and somehow you managed to taint them with, like, broken multiplayer, broken campaign, broken everything. This game was so colossally busted at launch that even me, as someone who plays these games annually, barely touched Battlefront Classic Collection when it was all said and done. The fact that this game needed fixing is just absurd in its own right. It's a port, and Aspire is the definition of you had one job. They port a stupid amount of games. The fact that they shouldn't screw anything up as far as I'm concerned, but the fact that they screwed something up so bad in such a massive way in the Battlefront Classic Collection is a heartbreaker for me, man. That is my childhood right there. I'll always remember my discovery of Battlefront because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. And so I remember talking to a friend in second grade saying, I wish there was a video game where you could kind of be like a stormtrooper. And he told me about Battlefront. I told my parents about it, and they got me it as a gift for my birthday, and my whole brain exploded at the idea of like, wait, I can just be like a rebel soldier. I can be a clone trooper. This is so cool. So to see that bit of childhood spirit crushed a little bit under the weight of modern gaming was a tough pill to swallow. So that's why you're at the number 10 spot. You did fix, you did clean up, but the way you launched, just unacceptable. Number 9. If I really cared about how upset people were going to get with me, I would bury this one further into the list when they inevitably fall off the video. But yeah, Hellblade 2. I already know people are going to be really upset with this pick. How dare you, Matty? But I got to be real with y'all. I adore the first Hellblade. And Hellblade 2, I just feel it misses the mark in almost every way outside of its visuals. It is stunning to look at. It is the best looking game ever. No doubt about it. But when it comes to things like combat, which was already taking a backseat in the first game, the fact that this is more mechanically slimmer, even though Ninja Theory claimed they put more time and research into it, was strange to me, especially because Ninja Theory is behind the very underrated DMC Devil May Cry game that I know a lot of people also don't like, but the combat in that game is really good. So to see them continuously step backwards with combat is strange, and I found the story to hit not as hard as the first one did. There was less of a personal message baked into this one, and I also feel like they missed out on good character development because the runtime was also shorter than the first game. I know there's the whole situation about Xbox buying Ninja Theory and the expectations laid upon them because of that acquisition, But I remove myself from all of that. You just got to look at the game as it is. And for me, as the game is, there's a whole lot of walking, not really a lot to do when it comes to character development, storytelling, combat. And they have this weird moment toward the end with a, quote, choice that just feels very surface level. The game feels heavily bound by technology. In a lot of ways, it feels like a research project to go and help other Xbox studios with their visuals with Unreal Engine 5, because more and more Xbox teams are using Unreal Engine, and no doubt Ninja Theory will justify their existence alone by how much they learned through just making this game. So yeah, as much as I love the first Hellblade, it almost feels like the sequel didn't justify itself, and by its end, it's teasing a third Hellblade, and I didn't really sign up personally for this series to get 3 games when the second one felt like it moved the story forward an inch. Number 8, Skull and Bones. You want to talk about, last game I was talking about research project. That's what this was, because we have the rumor that there is a Assassin's Creed Black Flag remake on the way. Gee, I wonder why, and I wonder what technology Ubisoft is going to use to build that game when Skull and Bones is kicking around. I still don't get why this game exists. I don't know how else to put it. It is a game that when I fired it up, I tried to keep an open mind. Okay, Ubisoft had this in development for like a decade. It got rebooted a bunch of times. They kind of got rid of the on-foot exploration and then brought it back because people were really upset about it. But then it started to fail to differentiate itself from Assassin's Creed, so many people started to wonder why it existed at all. I removed myself from all that. Let's just play it as it is, cool pirate game. And somehow they managed to make the ship combat feel worse than Assassin's Creed 4. Hell, worse in a lot of ways than Assassin's Creed 3. Like, the amount of options you have at your disposal, the way they over-rely on UI. I think they had the proper direction when it came to trying to make something a little more realistic. Like, okay, you get your more arcadey ship combat in Assassin's Creed, but we're going to make something a little more grounded here. But then you look across the sea at the competition in Sea of Thieves, which just, I think, is way more interactive, way more fun, way more chaotic, way more dynamic, and it feels like the archetypical Ubisoft game. By that, I don't mean in its game design structure, which typically Ubisoft games are discussed as in the checklists in the open world. It's a archetypical Ubisoft game in that they saw a wave, literally, and tried to catch that wave, literally, by saying, oh, Sea of Thieves, look how that's doing. Let's make our own ship game. We have the ship technology. Let's make our own ship game, and we can compete with them. And this is what this company has done time in, time out. It's why they are no longer the same Ubisoft of the early 2000s, because they continue to chase trends instead of doing what they first did that really ended with, I think, Far Cry 3 in defining the trends, pushing the trends forward, defining the open world, defining the action-adventure game. They were a great company at one point, but Skull and Bones is just boring to play. There's nothing really pulling me into its world. There's no great story. There's no great gameplay. The explorations, there's nothing really going on here, where I'd rather have something like a Black Flag where I can get off my ship, interact with people, do some quests, do some collectibles, and then move on to the next island or something like that. I feel like this experience was half-baked from the start because of Black Flag, and in turn, it just never justified its own existence. Number 7, sticking with Ubisoft, Star Wars Outlaws. Look, they're doing a great job with the patches, but at launch, this was a real heartbreaker, because I remember with Starfield in that marketing window, I was thinking, hey, if Starfield lets me down in exploration, I think that Ubisoft's going to have my back, because I really wanted old reliable when it came to Ubisoft and Star Wars Outlaws. Give me an open world set in the universe of Star Wars with some checklists, and to my surprise, they didn't do that. And what was there, I was like, okay, they're kind of leaning more into quests and organic exploration. I can get behind this, but everything from the technical disaster it was at launch with things like facial animations and broken AI, which again, I know they've tried to work on since then, but what I played and even after launch was bad. And then the very limited gameplay design that just felt so woefully under-tested, where someone at some point had to go, this ain't good. Because this game forces you to play in stealth so often. It made me sick, man, because all you're doing is choking people out in a Star Wars game. And when you pick up a weapon, you immediately put it down. And the sad part about this game, quite frankly, is that even after the updates land, they're hyping it up like they're big features. I'm like, how did you overlook this in the first place? Oh, you can now carry your weapon and mantle something without dropping it. You can climb a ladder and still hold on to your sniper rifle. How was this not a thing in the first place? I'm sorry. I'm glad they're working on fixing it. I'm glad they're making it better. But how did this ever get by in the first place will forever be beyond me. It was so old school every step of the way. If you got caught during a stealth segment, you got sent back to the checkpoint. So you had to play by the game's rules 24/7. There was no player freedom, no creative freedom, no interesting ways to approach its many beautiful locales. It is a game that I always defined as the slimmest margin between like a 5 and an 8 as someone who doesn't use number scores. That's how I look at it. It's such a thin line because there were so many gameplay decisions that just continue to collapse upon one another, and it makes for a very frustrating, linear experience that I was left very tired of despite the shorter than expected runtime, where the story took me about 20 hours to beat, all things considered. And honestly, the story was the least of my issues, all things considered. It wasn't great, but it also, I don't think, was very bad. So yeah, Star Wars Outlaws was a game I wanted to love, especially because the space exploration seemed cool too. But you're just floating around the galaxy and you're collecting like little random objects in space, but there's no interaction with other starships or boarding derelict space stations. Like all the opportunity that was there to make an open world Star Wars game, I feel was lost upon Outlaws. And it's been a bad stretch for Star Wars, really. I mean, look at this. 2 Star Wars games in this list already. And you got to think about things like The Acolyte. It's a bad time for the brand. And I say as a lifelong fan, it's a bad time for the brand. They need to get their act together. The quality needs to be better. Time for number 6, Concord. Oh man. Concord played all right, I guess, all things considered. And I know it's hard to talk about this game without talking about the massive financial failure that it was. But removing ourselves from the bloated budget, this game and its character designs, I just don't know where AAA gaming is at, where they're like, yeah, punch it. Like, that is what people want to play as. This individual is what people want to play as. This will inspire greatness. This will inspire excitement. As it was reported, Concord was made kind of in a vacuum in a studio full of toxic positivity. And in turn, that toxic positivity led to very little pushback when it came to these character designs, which ultimately sunk the game. But for me, I do think it goes further than that. Concord did not feel good to play. I always define the movement as feeling like I had cinder blocks tied around my ankles, right? Jumping around, moving around. It felt sluggish, man. And honestly, it felt like a game that was 6 years too late, which seemed to be the rumor, because this thing was greenlit after the whole Guardians of the Galaxy thing was popping off and Overwatch was popping off, and hey, let's combine these two together. And they arrive in 2024, and it is a really, really disappointing first-person shooter. Especially when you think about it as PlayStation's real return to first-person shooting, right? Like, I think about games like Killzone, games like Resistance, like wonderful first-person shooting franchises from PlayStation. And to see them get back in the FPS space, I remember when Concord was announced, I was like excited at the prospect of, oh, PlayStation, first-person shooter. And oh my God, was I wrong. All right, we're into the top 5 now, because the list has already been pretty catastrophically bad. So this is where it gets really interesting. Number 5 has to go to Reynaudis. Now, I've played a lot of Furyu RPGs. I think that they are kind of I define them as guilty pleasures. They're never going to be quite as good as the JRPGs they're imitating. For example, the Caligula effect takes great inspiration from the Persona franchise. And that's cool, from its art to its social systems. I like that the game wears its inspirations on its sleeve. And I think Caligula Effect's combat does a good enough job to help differentiate it from the competition. Reynaudis was leaning a bit into Kingdom Hearts, and that was exciting because no one really tries to stand toe-to-toe with Kingdom Hearts in its gameplay and how it operates, and also in its crossover-filled nature, where they managed to team up with Square Enix and bring in Neo The World Ends With You content. Neo The World Ends With You is a fantastic game that not nearly enough people have played. Plus, they brought in Yoko Shimomura, right, the composer for Kingdom Hearts, to do the music for this game. So everything was kind of running in favor of Reynaudis. It felt like this was their big splash, their big moment, and I don't think it was good at all. The combat, man, I don't know. It just felt like it had a lot of great ideas on paper, but never were fully tested enough to understand how deeply problematic it immediately is. So you're in a world where magic has basically been outlawed, and there's police that are going to enforce that, and then there's kind of the rebels who are trying to use their magic and be free. And you switch between these two protagonists, and the story and world setup is great. And I say that because that's typically what Furyu does. They have a really intriguing concept that hooks your imagination, and then the execution is always pretty lukewarm, but you're kind of already into the idea enough to just carry yourself into the experience deeper. And so that is kind of here already with Reynatus. But what happens is, because everyone uses magic, you have a magic limit that you use in combat. And so as you're using your magic, you'll run out of it, not like MP where you can use an item to restore it, but like literally run out of it, and then are forced to just run around combat arenas, dodging and running for your life, doing nothing else for like the next 15 seconds except waiting for your MP to recharge. It gets a little bit better when you can swap in different teammates and use their magic, so then there's a better flow. But even at that point, once everyone's drained, you do the worst thing an action combat system can do and force yourself to stop playing the game. I don't get how this system made its way through, because it definitely stops what could have been a fun, at the very least, mindless action game. But worst of all is that the mechanics it so deeply depends on to help you restore your mana, to keep flow in combat, and hell, to even beat enemies, is broken. In the parry system, there is a perfect timed parry and dodge system in this game, and the timing for it and the execution of this mechanic, it's impossible to explain in words because you have to feel it. But you'll press R1 on PlayStation to dodge, and you have to time the dodge so pixel perfectly. And I know some people say skill issue, but then when you time it, the delay is in for the actual dodge mechanic to pop up on screen, where you then have to release the R1 button at the perfect time. So if you mistime it by like a fraction of a second, you not only get hit, but then if you do nail it, you don't know until a second later when this thing has already popped up and you've probably let go of R1 after that point in time. It's a system that is so convoluted and bad that I look at it and think, how did a group of developers communicate and come up with this idea? And then when it's executed this way, like this was the understanding of that idea. Like, hey, we're going to have a perfect dodge system that restores MP. It's like, okay, cool, gotcha. But how do we get holding R1 and releasing at the perfect time? And it just doesn't feel good to play. And it's so frustrating because it is a game of inches, much like Star Wars Outlaws, where this could have been a much better combat system with just a few tweaks, but I think they really messed it up. And when you combine that with presentation that I think is just unacceptable nowadays, Furyu games in the last generation or so have been, again, charming imitations of games you already love. And they have that PS2 level quality. But this game doesn't even try to hide it with any cool presentation. You can tell they spent all of their budget on the opening cutscene. And when you see the faces and the animations in this game, it makes PS2 games look good. Good. You're hearing that right. It makes them look good. It's beyond frustrating because I do think, well, it's understandable. This is an independent developer. This was a new director's first game. You could tell they bit off more than they could chew. They tried to cram a million mechanics into it, and it all falls apart. This game is not good. I want it to be good, but it is not good, unfortunately. So I hope Furyu goes back to the drawing board and makes something pretty good with their next game. Now, it's time for number 4. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League comes to the front of the congregation. Rocksteady, what's going on, man? They lost a lot of talent making this game, and you could tell. Rocksteady, this is not. I think the most obvious thing when you decide to make a Suicide Squad game is to kind of look at the Batman Arkham series as a touchstone, maybe not in combat and in free flow manner. Okay, Batman and that combat system was built around him, but looking at how his personality was expressed through combat is so important to the character because it makes him feel incredible when you go through that perfect free flow stretch. It brings the character to life. Like, this is Batman. This is what he would do to a group of 20 thugs. These are the bones he would break. This is how it would sound. This is how it would feel. It was a form of storytelling unto itself in a really weird way. And I feel like Rocksteady completely missed the mark on that when it came to the gameplay of Suicide Squad. I can go in on the story complaints that I've talked about in separate videos, but no doubt the internet already has as well. So don't get it twisted. The story in Suicide Squad is bad. And the post-launch support is even worse. Have you seen some of the characters they have thrown into this game? It is like they are making a complete race to the bottom. How can we bankrupt this game quicker? How can we move on to the next project quicker? Make the worst possible additions to the game imaginable. How do we make the Joker look stupid? Who the hell is Mrs. Freeze? What is going on with this game, dude? I don't know, but that is some of the worst post-launch support I have personally seen. I tapped into season 1 and tapped out like an hour later. It was bad. But for me, it is the gameplay. For example, you look at the Arkham games, very free of UI. You see when an enemy is about to attack you, little yellow lightning bolt above their head, and that's it. That's all you need to know. And some people even turn it off because the way that animations are communicated to you as a player and telegraphed properly without feeling too spoon-fed to you is so well done that you could play the Arkham combat system without any sort of heads-up display. But when you go into Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, this is one of the first games to ever give me a legitimate headache while playing it. The amount of alerts, indicators, flashes, explosions, UI elements all over the screen. It is no exaggeration. It is painful to look at and immediately sets your brain into an autopilot mode because it enters survival mode when looking at everything on screen. You cannot humanly process this much information at once, and it is so poorly designed for not even considering the human experience in it all. I cannot read every damage number, alert, arrow on the screen, mini-map marker, quest marker, etc. It is ridiculous how unaware this game is of its player and just what it feels like to look at all this crap on screen and just be like, yep, that's the experience. But it's also, as I said earlier, not representing the Suicide Squad properly. I'm not asking for a expansive free-flow combat system among all 4 characters, though that would be over-delivering and making something really great there. But to give everyone a gun and strip them of personality, outside of Deadshot maybe, it really doesn't make sense to just equip everyone, make Harley Quinn web swing. I just don't understand how you have a group of anti-heroes and you look at them and the first thing you think is to hand them all a gun and make a live service looter shooter out of it, when what has defined your entire pedigree and has sold well in the past, by the way, is making true to character superhero games that rival the best things you can find on the big screen. And to see what they did to our Arkham Batman, man. This game, I mean, Rocksteady, I want to have faith, but this is such a radical departure from the last game they did in Arkham Knight that you got to wonder, man. You got to wonder what's going on with them and what that next game is going to look like. All right, we're in the top 3. This is where you're really going to see my taste shine through. Dragon Age the Veilguard. Man, I don't know if I have played a bigger disappointment this year, surprisingly. And it's a tough one to top, but Dragon Age Veilguard just falls a little bit below this other disappointment at our number 1 spot. But this is a game that I felt had everything going for it. You had the time, you had the budget, you had EA's single-player driven support. You had the community rooting for you. Everyone was reminded of how great BioWare can be with the Legendary Edition. There were people tracking the leaks and the rumors. There was a level of optimism that BioWare could be back, that there was the desire to be back, even if it was going to be a little bit different because it was going to be action combat. It wasn't going to be like Origins, that this could be a strong BioWare game that may have even leaned into the sensibilities of Mass Effect 2. Everything was lined up. Community, support from developers and publishers. Everyone was rooting for Dragon Age the Veilguard. And I know for a lot of people it became undone with that reveal trailer. But I held out hope after seeing the gameplay reveal that this would be good and previewed it and thought, hey, you know what? This has a chance. But this game, across its 60-hour stretch in my experience, collapses in such a phenomenal way. For starters, if you are out there and you're trying to study writing as a profession, whether it be books, movies, games, whatever it may be, if you want to look at how a AAA high-budget product should never be written, it should be this game right here in Dragon Age: The Veilguard. This is some of the most cringe-inducing writing, and I use that term sparingly because I know it's overused on the internet, but it really is some of the most cringe-inducing writing that has ever graced media in my 30 years on this earth, that I cannot believe some of this stuff made it past the finish line, that no one checked anyone along the way and went, hey, this doesn't sound right coming out of this character, or this sounds like a good idea in our head, but when we put it on paper and we had someone voice it, doesn't sound that good now. Everything from the romance to character interactions, it is insufferable quite often. And I say that so harshly because this game could have been so much better. There are glimpses of greatness here. I think Emmerich is a great character. I do think the very few interactions you get with Solus are wonderful. Morgan has one of the best interactions in the game, and the finale is damn good. That's why it's in the 3rd spot and not the number 1 spot, is there are some occasionally redeeming moments of this game. The combat can be serviceable at best, but I'll get into my problems with that in a moment. But Dragon Age the Veilguard just spends so much of its time wasting yours with needless dialogue that's either corny or boring, or it's like teenagers squabbling. It's like High School the Musical. Like it is, as a Dragon Age fan, such a massive departure from even Inquisition in my eyes. I'm not even touching Origins in this conversation. We're talking about Inquisition. This feels like a far cry away from even that video game. And for those who don't know, I'm really critical of Inquisition. I think it has a lot of problems, even narratively, even writing-wise. But Veilguard disappointed me so much that it made me look at Inquisition in a much favorable way. Like, perhaps I did not treat you as well as I should have. It is a game devoid of the choice that a Dragon Age game is rightfully defined by across the past 3 entries, where there's only a couple of, quote, major choices, with the real ones being packed into the actual finale of the game where you feel a sense of consequence. But it is a title that, narratively speaking, I have never felt more detached from where the industry is at, where I saw those review scores pouring in, and was, quite frankly, a bit surprised at how people champion this as the BioWare's back moment. I've been playing their games my entire life, from Mass Effect to Jade Empire to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, even a little Baldur's Gate. This was not the BioWare's back moment. As much as I wanted it to be, as much as I was championing it to be so, this was not that. And that doesn't even get into the gameplay, which I think at first is entertaining, but then becomes very tedious, very repetitive, where you're constantly popping blight boils of the worst looking darkspawn that the series has ever been graced with. Like, there's no expansive puzzle design, no expansive enemy design. It's repetition, repetition, repetition. And by the end of the 60-hour point, as I played it across almost 3 weeks, I could not wait to be done. The game had exhausted me and honestly left me in a different state as a gamer, which very few games do. But when I finished it, I was so upset. I was just like, what happened? How is this a BioWare game? I just think they're capable of so much more, and I'm pulling for them for the next Mass Effect game. I hope it's a lot more mature, a lot more serious, and a lot better written. In the number 2 spot, breaking up all these AAA games, we have an anime game. The worst anime game I have ever played, in Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash. I am a late adopter of loving JJK. I was not too crazy about season 1 because I feel like it's popcorn flick anime is what I call it. Like, you sit down, you just get entertained by some action, and the story, at least with what is in the anime thus far, I don't know about the breadth of the manga, I haven't found super captivating. Then season 2 happens. Then you get the Shibuya arc. Then you understand, oh, JJK is capable of some really, really great moments. So I was excited for Cursed Clash, but it is the quintessential lazy anime game. Reusing shots from the anime. No original assets, really, when it comes to the story. It tries to retool the My Hero Once Justice combat system, which Once Justice is respectable. It's not great, but it's not awful. But they tried to retool that into one of the most high-octane, action-packed anime that's on the market today. That just doesn't work. JJK, if any game deserved the, as we call it, Ultimate Ninja Storm treatment, it was JJK. Just by nature of its animation, its music, this was the Ultimate Ninja Storm experience that it needed. Because it was popular enough to get it. It has a movie in theaters that did really well. Like, JJK could have pulled it off. But it did what every single anime game does. As you saw, we started the list. How do we cut corners? That is the first question every anime game developer seems to ask themselves. How do we cut a corner? How do we reuse something you've seen before? And every anime game insists on being a 3D arena fighter, and JJK Cursed Clash is no different, with its awful combat system that just doesn't even allow you to chain together really good feeling combos as you're just roaming around this awkward camera in these 3D spaces that look terrible. And UI design is just so criminally underappreciated in this industry, because when it is out of place, you notice it, like in something like Suicide Squad, like in something such as JJK Curse Clash. But when it's fine, you don't notice it. It's the same thing with great audio design. When it's great, you really don't pay attention to it. I always encourage people to listen closer because it is something you should appreciate more. But JJK is the perfect example of UI that's bad. Why is that? Because they'll have like moments where the characters are talking and it's just like a big text box and a portrait in the middle of the screen where you're fighting. So you can't even see what the hell is going on. Again, it's just not well thought out. It's rushed. It's bad. In anime games, look, I grew up with these since the early 2000s, right? Like the Naruto games, the Dragon Ball games. I know they haven't always tried to push the limits of a game's budget and go full AAA. I know they've always had their little safe pocket, but that was because anime back then was still growing. Anime is a phenomenon now. Anime is really popular now. Anime is mainstream now. Anime makes millions and millions and millions of dollars. Stop Bandai and other anime game developers pretending that this genre cannot have much more money invested in it. That games cannot be more than crappy 2D and 3D fighters. Because JJK, at the very least, should have been a high-budget 3D arena fighter. It should not have been the reused My Hero 1's Justice combat system and feeling as awful as it did with such a limited character roster, by the way. JJK has great, charming characters that you want to play as. And this game is devoid of that as well. Awful. Awful. But not quite as awful as the most disappointing / worst game I played this year. And it's DLC, so we're going to make a little asterisk on it, I suppose. Starfield Shattered Space. This is, I know this is for a lot of people a moment where they're like, well, it's not the worst thing this year, Matty. And I get it. But for me, and my taste, and the disappointment I experienced with this, it is the worst thing I played this year. It really is. Bethesda Game Studios is my favorite all-time developer. Developer of Fallout 3, Oblivion, Morrowind, Skyrim, Fallout 4. These are all some of my favorite video games of all time. Fallout 76 has gradually redeemed itself, with this year being a real moment of turnaround for that game. And Starfield at launch, I really did enjoy. But when people say to me, oh, Shattered Space, man, it's just more Starfield. No. Because base Starfield was a million times better than Shattered Space. And Shattered Space is a moment where I went, what is the quality bar here? Really, what is the measurement of quality releases for Bethesda Game Studios at this point? Because when it came to questing, choices, impact, writing, exploration, gameplay, performance, everything about Shattered Space was bad in those departments. I'm not one of those people who acts like everything Bethesda Game Studios has ever written has been bad. I think Starfield actually has some of the best quest lines that Bethesda Game Studios has ever done. I think the UC Vanguard quest line speaks for itself. I adore it. I think there's moments in the main story that are genuinely great. You'll find zero of that sort of energy in Starfield Shattered Space. Exploration is what defines a Bethesda Game Studios game. Seeing something in the distance and wandering to it. It's that simple 1-2 punch that it makes it so captivating to be in their worlds, where it feels lived in, it feels real, and it's interactive. So Starfield Shattered Space had literally the ball on the tee to just drive this one 400 yards onto the green and putt for an eagle afterwards. For God's sakes, man, the fact that even the wandering in Shattered Space was bad. Why was it bad? It wasn't thought out. Oh, we're on the home planet House Varun, Varun Kai. This place has been abandoned for a while. No one knows what's going on here. And the first location I wander to, on the ass end of the town that you start this whole quest line in, is literally a Crimson Fleet base. Bethesda has insisted time in time out that Starfield has its own identity. And if I were to give it an identity, it's a looter shooter with space elements and some pretty decent dialogue at times. That's the identity I would give it. But Bethesda Game Studios has progressively leaned between Fallout 4, 76, and now Starfield into this crappy looter shooter genre, and they need to stop. Because all of Starfield's locations were either procedurally generated or just designed to get you like legendary level loot, but not the unique weapons and armor that really defined a Bethesda Game Studios experience. And after waiting a year after Starfield had come out, really hoping that Bethesda took in feedback, I never felt so ignored as a fan of their games. Like, it felt as if they were checking boxes. Oh, you can wander. Don't worry, you can wander. But to what? What makes it good? What are the quests here? What are the people I meet that are here? I couldn't tell you anyone who was really interesting when it came to the Shattered Space questline. In fact, the most interesting character should have been Andreja, one of my favorite characters in gaming. But they let her down so massively in her involvement in the story, in her reactions to things. She does comment on stuff as you explore, but when your entire romance was supposed to be tested by this moment, and it's not addressed once, and instead put a bow on it, we're good, was one of the most underwhelming things I've experienced in gaming storytelling. And to make it all the worse, for a $30 expansion, this was unacceptably short, as I did everything, explored every location, did all the quest lines, did everything. And I was left there with my jaw on the floor going, I'm done. That's it. That's all I get for $30. And I'm sorry, but when you look at last year with Phantom Liberty and all the changes that CD Projekt has made, all of the new content they added, and then you look at it compared to Shattered Space, and even in this year with Shadow of the Erdtree and the amount of content you get there for around the same price tag, a little bit more, it is embarrassing what Bethesda Game Studios delivered to you for half the price of a full video game. They are capable of more, 100%, but they need to start listening. And I say that because then an interview came out with Phil Spencer where they were hypothesizing, him and Todd Howard, that the reason Shattered Space didn't go over well is because they gave us the buggy earlier. No, it's because the questing was bad. It's because the exploration was bad. Everything that makes your games good was bad here in Shattered Space. Not because people were just console warring and hating on Bethesda Game Studios. No, even diehard fans like me, diehard fans like my co-host Lord Cognito, we're looking at this going, this is like really bad. Like, how this is their worst ever DLC if you're excluding things like the workshop stuff they've done. They are capable of way more. I even think base game Starfield shows that. Maybe you disagree with that, and fair enough. But for me, as someone who's a huge fan of their stuff, this is unacceptable and should never happen again. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I've ranted and rambled enough. Those are my top 10 worst games of 2024. I look forward to hearing about yours down below. Fire away. I'm going to go rest my voice because I've been yelling a lot. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.